Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Ich warte seit Wochen auf diesen Tag und tanz vor Freude über den Asphalt.
Hello and welcome to Gegenpressing, the Bundesliga podcast. I'm your host Manu Fade. Stefan Bienkowski is still on his, I don't want to say much deserved honeymoon. He's just on his honeymoon. But that's okay because I'm not joined by one but two guests. And joining us for the first time, I think, is Marie Schulte-Bockum, a freelance journalist, sports journalist based in Munich. She's done quite a lot about the Bundesliga, and I think she can give you a much better overview of what she does than I can. But first of all, Mary, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. And I'm tuning in from Munich, and I love talking about the Bundesliga in English. It's kind of like my weird little niche, so really happy to be on. Yeah,
in from my hometown. Born and raised in Munich, of course. I miss it. I'll be back soon. So yeah, thanks for joining the show today. And as I said, two guests today. We're the triple M's, Manuel, Matt, and Mary. Matt Ford, as you know, you're becoming quite a regular on this show, Matt. What did Chris say the last show? He's like a bad smell. He won't go away. I don't think that counts for you though.
I think it's more down to Stefan, who keeps going on holiday and taking random breaks more than anything. So.
Yeah, it's true. Stefan has been on a very long break. But Matt, how's it going? You all good?
Yeah, all good, thanks. Been quite a fan-intensive weekend. I attended 2 games this weekend from on the terraces. So I was on the Südtribüne in Dortmund on Friday night, which we'll discuss, and I was in the Gästeblock in the away end in Frankfurt yesterday to see Cologne's 1-1 draw. So yeah, it's been quite an intensive weekend. So now we can try and make some sense of it.
Yeah, we were sense of it, and I saw the photos, Matt. Extremely jealous of you being able to go to games. And I think we have a ton to discuss. So guys, before we do it, a little break for our partners. This episode of the Gegenpressing podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for all your betting needs. Get the latest odds, lines, and matchup reports for baseball, boxing, golf, and more. BetOnline continues to be the fastest and easiest way to place your wagers, including live betting and your favorite casino and card games, available to play right from your phone. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and get in on the action. Remember to use the promo code BELIEVE, that is BLEAV, BELIEVE, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Matt, let's start with Dortmund. You know, the post-mortem on a horrendous start to the season. That's 1 win, 2 draws. This draw, though, in particular, the 2-2 against Heidenheim. Yeah, I think we all heard the boos and whistles. You were right in the middle of it. You attended this game in as you said, on the Südtribüne rather than the press box, which is a very different perspective, right? Let's start here. How was it, and how did you perceive this reaction by the fans?
I mean, the first thing that struck me was the direct comparison with the action of the yellow wall on the final day of last season against Mainz. I was at that game in my usual capacity in the press box, and what was remarkable, despite the events of that day, which were even more catastrophic at least from a Borussia Dortmund point of view, was that at least after the immediate silence which followed the full-time whistle against Mainz, the supporters reacted by chanting at the players to stand up. applauding them, singing for them. We had those famous images of the players, and particularly the coach Edin Terzic stood in front of the Südtribüne with tears in his eyes as the fans chanted his name. And the idea was that they would rebuild from there. This time at full time, there was a completely different reaction. I've never heard boos and whistles like it in Dortmund, and I've been to that stadium dozens and dozens and dozens of times. I've never heard that sort of reaction. It was absolutely furious. Admittedly, maybe partly to do with a series of VAR calls, but 90% due to the performance of Borussia Dortmund. And when the players, dared approach the Südtribüne at full time, they were told in no uncertain terms to turn around and go the other way. Certainly a marked contrast.
Why do you think it was such a big contrast? Why the such a positive reaction after throwing away the title to this? It seems like such a big turnaround in the span of just 3 games.
You might be able to find the best answer to that in the podcast that you did for match day 1 when I was here, and maybe copy and paste the audio out of that, because the same adjectives apply. Dortmund were sloppy, Dortmund were laborious, Dortmund were slow, Dortmund were lacking in any sort of offensive ideas, misplaced passes from start to finish, chances going begging, and new signings failing to have anywhere near the sort of impact which coaching staff and fans alike would expect. Add to that the constellation whereby it's not just like throwing a lead away against any other established Bundesliga team. You're talking about one of the smallest teams to have ever played in the Bundesliga in Heidenheim, a team who I think we're still looking for their first away goal in the Bundesliga, and of course got it. But yes, that obviously adds to the frustration from a Dortmund point of view. Although it must be said at this point, maybe before we go any further, that take absolutely nothing away from Heidenheim, who I think after struggling for the first 20-25 minutes or so, actually really, really found their way into the game, and with a bit more luck and a bit more, slightly more clinical finishing, could potentially even have inflicted an even more embarrassing defeat on Dortmund. Absolutely hats off to Frank Schmidt and Heidenheim. But for Dortmund, it's a catastrophic start, particularly with the fixtures that they had. Cologne at home, Bochum away, Heidenheim at home. With all due respect, they're not top draw Bundesliga opposition, and to have dropped 4 points already is. There's no other way of putting it. It's a terrible start.
Mari, how do you see that, the situation in Dortmund?
Yeah,
and
I mean, it's fascinating.
The fan reaction in particular.
It's really interesting for me to hear Matt's perspective from being in the stadium, because we all know that this is a team that feeds off the energy of the home crowd so much. And I did watch the entire game on Friday night, of course, and it was shocking, just how good the Heidenheim attacks were. Now, I said before the season that Heidenheim, I think, is the stronger of the promoted teams. When I predicted the final table, I think I had them at 14th or 15th, just because they have a very attacking side and a very, very good coach. But still, you got to ask yourself as Dortmund, with the defensive quality that you have, is that the barometer, with the Champions League coming up, and having these massive holes in the last third. Heidenheim was able to kind of jump past the midfield a bunch of times. I think something that gives me hope, for their future performances is that Bino Gittins has returned to fitness. Duranville is getting closer as well to full match fitness. Felix Metscher, he had a bit of a tough start to the season also, with some hurting muscles here and there. So you do have options. And then, not to get all desperate, but given that Sebastian Aller is in poor form, Karim Adeyemi is in poor form, it might be worth looking towards Paris Brunner as well, who won the under 17 World Cup, the Euros, I think it was, with Germany this summer, and recently got the Fritz Walter Medaille for Germany's best youth product in his age group, ahead of Noah Davies and Hassan Ouedraogo, so two huge talents at Barcelona and Schalke respectively. And he's a goal-scoring threat. He's had a great start to the season. He's scored in every game. And maybe that's what the team needs, is someone, same goes for Duranville and Bino Gittens, or even Gio Reyna, who I think is now fit again. Someone who has nothing to lose and can inject some positivity, because Adeyemi didn't really use his opportunity to show the coach that he should be a starter in the last game. And the only player I think who has any attacking quality, who's being able to translate that onto performances on the pitch so far, has been Julian Brandt, and that's just not enough for a team that has so much quality in the squad.
I mean, it's the same time though, you're now in a situation where with 3 games in, the international break is on, Mary, and there's a certain unemployed coach living outside of Munich who's already being mentioned with a possibility of going to Dortmund. Of course, I still think we're a long way away of Dortmund firing one of their own, but it's kind of telling that we're already at the stage where other coach names are discussed at Dortmund.
Yeah, with Nagelsmann, I think, with all due respect, he's probably reaching a little higher for his next employer than, Bundesliga top 4 team, which is what Dortmund is. But I see Dortmund as kind of year on year internationally being happy with reaching the second round in the Champions League, and I don't think that's quite Nagelsmann's aim. Otherwise, he could have easily just gone to Tottenham, for example, who have a similar kind of club quality, team quality, stadium, etc. But I think he's waiting for that very, very highest, maybe top 10 European club, both in terms of, squad quality, but also financial quality. And also I don't think he would fit very well at Dortmund. He made a lot of mistakes to do with young age and maturity at Bayern, and Dortmund is just as hard an environment to work in. So I don't see him as a threat to Terzic, but I do think that Terzic will probably have a few uncomfortable meetings with the higher ups in the international break where, he's kind of used up some of those brownie point reservoirs that he perhaps developed in the past season. And I do think he's so good at selling himself, and he's very calm, and he's a very good ambassador for the club. But it's starting to, and I'm not a Dortmund fan by any means, but as a football fan, it's even starting to annoy me, this kind of folklorish quality of him. This isn't Mainz. This isn't some small rural team. This is a huge global club, and just by saying, "Oh, the fans are so disappointed," that's not enough. That's not enough for the amount of quality that is in this squad, and he's not gonna charm his way out of this. Is kind of my view.
Matt, that's really interesting because we had this conversation before the podcast, and I think you had some thoughts on this as well when it comes to Edin Terzic, but also Sebastian Kehl and some of the signings that they have made.
Yeah, I think Mehebi's right to point out some of the positives at Dortmund, and I think if you are going to be optimistic and positive about it, then the one thing to point out is that it can only go up from here. I think it can only get better. So in that sense, I think it's right to point out the return of Julian Duranville, Jamie Bino Gittens, who he came on as a sub against Bochum, didn't he? Mokoku came on against Heidenheim, Gio Reyna returning to the squad. That's all fine, and I think, as we pointed out last time, Terzic made no bones last season about the impact he wanted his substitutes to have, and he spoke often about what he called the depth in his squad. That's one way of looking at it. On the other hand, you could look at it as maybe a reliance on impact super subs off the bench, as, if you're being critical, perhaps actually maybe an admission of a certain lack of other ideas of other solutions. I'm not sure if constantly relying on young additions for impact off the bench is necessarily a sustainable approach. And yeah, I think as we were talking about before, so much of Dortmund's, I suppose, transfer policy, club philosophy, whatever you want to call it, over the past few years has been based around good scouting networks, purchasing well, particularly looking at young talents from Ligue 1 in France, from England, and giving these players the platform. I think everyone's well aware of that. But there's been a massive departure this summer, and I think we mentioned that last time as well. The new additions they brought in this summer are not of that caliber at all. They're all supposedly established, proven Bundesliga talent to one degree or another in Ben Spaini, Sabitzer, Metscher, and obviously most recently Niklas Füllkrug. I wonder what the logic is behind that. Behind that changing approach, and I think maybe if you're being overly critical, you could suggest that is the attempt to bring in established players perhaps an attempt to hope that those players will use their experience to sort out problems automatically, because the ideas aren't coming from elsewhere, and I think at some point Terzic and Cahill are probably going to have to answer those questions, because at least on the evidence of the 3 Bundesliga games so far, there's not much of a plan.
Okay, so I find it really interesting what you said there, Matt, and I agree with it. With that in mind, and before we move on to other topics, because I feel we have talked about Dortmund quite a bit, and I think we need to dissect this further, maybe once the international break has come and passed and they had another game to play, and see if it gotten better. And I'm going to take this to both of you. So maybe Mary, to you first, but Niklas Füllkrug, panic buy, yes or no?
I mean, yes, clearly. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's got to be a cursed transfer. You know, this is a player I've seen live in the stadium in my capacity as a reporter 3 times in the past few months. And he is someone who can lift up his team, not necessarily in terms of sporting quality, although he's definitely proven that as the top goal scorer last season, but also just mentality. You know, he's extremely focused when he comes on for warm-up. He kind of helps build up younger players. He's a great role player, as we keep seeing. You know, you can lob a long ball in kind of desperate moments, like at the end of the Heidenheim game. He's a really useful player because he can, stop a ball, pass it, score. He's great for set pieces because he's good at heading the ball. And obviously I think his technical ability isn't quite to the standard of Sebastian Aller, but it's good that they have a different type of player, and who's also happened to be a clear number 9 like Aller, but who has different strengths. So why not? You know, I think kind of like Matt was hinting at, the fact that they recruited so many established Bundesliga players and actually so many German or German-speaking players this summer is a clear change. And it surprised me as well, because that is something that has not worked for them in the past 5 to 10 years. Every time they've done that, you know, when they signed Maximilian Philipp for 20 million, when they signed Nico Schulz, you know, the infamous example, with the tiny exception of Julian Brandt, every time they've signed Bundesliga players, it's been awful. And to me, it's also a bit of a lack of aspiration, because you know, Bayern sign players to compete in Europe, and it seems like Dortmund sign players to compete in the Bundesliga, because with all due respect, you can't tell me that like Sabitzer is someone who's going to necessarily lift them to a new European level. So it's interesting, but I do think that their path that they've trodden before of integrating young players, you know, just because they didn't sign those this summer, they signed Duranville in the winter. Like I said, they have Paris Brunner. They have some very good youth products from their own team currently out on loan, like Tom Rothe, for example. And Jinma, I think, is at Bremen. I don't know if he's on loan or if that's a permanent deal, but he also played very well this weekend. So they're doing something right, but it's just it's a lot of they kind of lack, even in recruiting and from a sporting director perspective, they lack their spark and their imagination that made them so great in the past few years. And I do think that's concerning and shouldn't all just be pinned on Edin Terzic, who did, very much get them close to their first Bundesliga title in 10 years last season. And so we shouldn't suddenly completely say he's an awful coach, because they did play a very, very good second half of the last season, a very good Rückrunde with pretty much the same personnel minus Jude Bellingham, of course.
All right, Matt, your thoughts? Füllkrug, panic buy or not?
Not necessarily panic buy. Obviously, I think Mary's right to point out that he obviously has his qualities. He proved that. He proved that to Germany, for Germany to an extent as well. And yeah, particularly in those scenarios, when you're chasing a goal in added time, he can obviously play a role. The bigger question for Dortmund is why they even find themselves in those situations in the first place, and I don't think Niklas Füllkrug is a solution to that. And then there's also the issue that if you are, and we might come on to this next, if we are looking at top level strikers who, or at least top strikers with top potential, you only have to look at Bayer Leverkusen, who have managed to find an extremely good striker, and arguably the sort of profile of player from the sort of league that Borussia Dortmund would traditionally have been looking. Obviously, I'm talking about Victor Boniface. It seems like an interesting difference that he's landed in Leverkusen, whereas Dortmund have found themselves fishing around for as Mary was saying, top 4 level Bundesliga strikers, perhaps.
I love that you took my transition straight out of my mouth.
It wasn't planned, trust me.
No, but that's exactly my transition I was going for. Because I was going to go to Leverkusen next, and I was going to use Victor Boniface as my transition to talk about Leverkusen. So well done. Great minds think alike, I guess. Because you're exactly right. I mean, Bayer Leverkusen did sign Victor Boniface for 20.5 million from Union Saint-Gilloise, right? And this is a player that has worked out really well for them. 4 goals in 3 games, 2 assists as well. Leverkusen have been flying, guys. The way that Javi Alonso has been playing, there was hints of it, I think, before the season started, that they could be for real. The way that they have signed and found players, not just Boniface. I mean, Granit Xhaka is turning out quickly to be a real good signing as well. I just feel that, I'm always very, very reluctant naming Leverkusen a potential title challenger, because I lived through the early 2000s and late 1990s, and I saw them throw away title opportunities like no one else. I've seen them start really well in the Bundesliga campaign and fizzle out. The one with Jupp Heynckes in charge and Toni Kroos on loan comes to mind. And I guess, Mary, let's start with you then. From what we've seen from Leverkusen, are they for real?
Yeah, I kind of agree with you in the sense that I think the hype is a bit premature. I think the praise is very much warranted and deserved, both in terms of the coaching and the recruiting. For example, Victor Boniface, Eintracht Frankfurt wanted him as well. They were very interested in the player for months. And of course, they also saw him in the European competition, where he played a very good Conference League season last year. That's where I first saw him, when he played against Leverkusen, I believe it was. But he also played against Union, I think. The fact that Leverkusen got him for what's now turning out to be maybe a bargain price speaks for them and their reputation also with young players, which is super important. And of course, like you said, in the late 90s, early 2000s, they built that by making a few, especially from South America, building the careers of a few huge players. It's Leverkusen, let's be honest. They always mess up, usually in the spring. I think Xhaka could turn out to be their most important signing just because it lessens a little bit the dependence on Florian Wirtz, which I believe cost Seoane his job last season because the team was just so dependent on Wirtz in the middle of the park, and it's always dangerous when you're dependent on such a young player and on one player because this is an 11-man or woman sport. And Xhaka, he's I think sometimes he gets reduced to being a defensive player, but he's a very good passer. He's very reliable. He's a good leader on the pitch. He really kind of is someone that the young players like Frimpong or Tapsoba can orient themselves on, and he takes a little bit of the heavy lifting off their shoulders as well. I think they'll stay at the top until the end. They'll compete for the Champions League spots, but I don't see them challenging Bayern. I think if we have to assign that role now, to me, that probably be Leipzig.
What do you think, Matt? Leverkusen title challenger? Too soon?
I'm going to contradict the very headline that I wrote today. I'm not sure if the piece has actually been published yet, because I actually totally agree with both of you, and particularly what Mary was saying. It is Leverkusen. Let's all calm down. They have these nicknames and this reputation for a reason, and it has only been 3 games. Nevertheless, I have actually written a headline which does actually refer to the words title challenge. So maybe jumping the gun a little bit too soon, but why not? I've gone for it. Leverkusen do look a bit different this season, and I actually think that with Simon Rolfers there in the sporting director role, and particularly with Rudi Völler having moved on, and most importantly with Xavi Alonso there on the touchline, I feel like there's a bit of the old Leverkusen identity might have departed the Bayern Arena, perhaps. Maybe, but we'll know more come April and May, obviously. The start's been really, really, really impressive. We've been through Victor Boniface. That's who I've been writing about today. The various roles he fulfills in the team. It's not just his scoring. He scored 3 different types of goals as well. He scored, front post header against Gladbach, last week. This week it was opening the scoring with a fantastic dribble, which left a couple of Darmstadt players sprawled out on the turf, and then he culminated it with a nice little chip to finish. So, really good variety of goals. He's involved in the build-up play. He's pacey off the last man. He can drop deep and perform that pivot role, holding the ball up. He really does seem to have absolutely everything. It wasn't just, obviously we were questioning why Dortmund weren't looking at that sort of player. Obviously it's been mentioned how Frankfurt were interested, but the finances were a little bit uncertain because obviously the big money deal for Kolo Muani hadn't been done at that point because that all got done so late. I believe Red Bull Leipzig were also interested, but had reservations regarding Boniface's injury history. He's already had 2 ACL tears despite his young years. I think when he was playing in Norway, so I think that maybe discouraged them slightly. But yeah, really, really good start. I think it's 4 goals and a couple of assists already. And yeah, as Mary was touching on, probably the even more important differences are taking place further back in midfield. Xhaka and Wirtz, I think, complement each other really, really well. What's been noticeable for a couple of the goals, I think, away at Gladbach last week, but also this week against Darmstadt, is a lot of the space that Florian Wirtz has found himself in midfield. He seems to have loads of space around him, and I think that's often down to Granit Xhaka, who with his engagement in the game, with the way he puts himself about, I think attracts players to him, which in turn tends to open up a little bit more space for Florian Wirtz to cause some real damage. So I think the two of them complement each other really well, and they fit into what is looking like an increasingly rounded and versatile Xavi Alonso team. title challenge, who knows? Long way to go. But Leverkusen certainly have some of the key ingredients.
What do you think, Manuel? Actually, I'm interested now.
Yeah, I think I'm going to wait until the match day after the international break when Leverkusen go to Bayern. I think if they get a result there, I'm going to lean myself out of the window and say that they are a title challenger. I do think that I've talked to quite a few sporting directors of other clubs. I have spoken to Simon Rolfes a few times in the past. He's actually been on this podcast. I need to add that as well. And I do think that I highly regard him. I also noticed that a lot of people around the league highly regard him. Everyone that I talk to from other clubs has mentioned that Leverkusen have had probably the best transfer window of all teams in Germany. And I think that's always high praise, right? When other teams mention a club, and say this is a team that is going to be very dangerous. It means that they have them on the radar. And as Leverkusen and Leipzig came up quite frequently, and I think that they have found all the right ingredients. The proof is in the pudding, as Stefan always says when he's on the show. And I think that proof in the pudding will be at the Allianz Arena after the international break. And look, if they beat Bayern, then I'm going to say this is for real. Even a draw, I think I would say, if you take a point at the Allianz Arena, that's a really good scenario for you, right? It means that you're not dropping points to Bayern. It means that you're staying level with them. And I think that is really where I want to see them perform at the highest level. I was really impressed by the Leipzig result as well. That was a bit tighter, but it was at home. So, that is really where it is for me with Leverkusen. But I do think that there's a chance that they are for real and that they can go all the way. Maybe, to push for a proper title challenges, which is what we want. So yeah, that's my opinion, Mary.
Thanks. Something I just thought of actually that's worth mentioning in case any of your listeners missed it. Edmund Tapsoba, the centre back, he extended his contract until 2028. Obviously, we're not sure, maybe Manuel knows this, or you, Matt, if there's a release clause, but this is a player that was linked with a Premier League move, especially to Tottenham, pretty much the whole year. And it's great that, it's a good sign of the club's stability and also the club's ambitions that they can link a player like that to the club long term. And I'm sure in the process, they probably upped his salary, which is also sometimes a gamble, when you have high earning players for such long contracts, you're kind of saying, we believe we're going to play European football and at best Champions League football in the foreseeable future. But it's a good signal also to other teammates, like maybe if we separate them into the top and slightly below, like Jonathan Tah. I think for the top talents, I would say that includes Frimpong, Wirtz, and below that maybe Adli and some other players. It's nice to see, and it's something that not all Bundesliga clubs can always pull off. So yeah, we'll see. At the very least, if there's a kind of Ronda Kolomwani scenario, then Leverkusen will probably get a lot of money for him as well.
I mean, people who listen to this podcast, the transfer show in particular, would have known that Tapsoba wasn't going to Tottenham, or that Piero Hincapié wasn't going to leave either. Which is why you need to subscribe and listen to the transfer show, because we do get those insights. But contract renew. I think that's the Xabi Alonso effect. I wrote about that a couple of weeks ago. That he has players really want to play for him, and they want to be around him. I did an interview with Florian Wirtz in November. And he spoke in great lengths about how much it means for him to play under someone like Xabi Alonso. And, there were a couple of clubs coming in very late for Florian Wirtz, and they were rebuffed, because the player doesn't really have any ambitions at the moment to leave.
Yeah, Manuel, can you say a little, I was hearing from England, from some people there, that Man City, that Guardiola actually made a move for him. Is that true? Is that what you were hearing as well?
Yeah, that's correct. But there was no chance. Not until next summer. that's like the earliest anyone can go for Florian Wirtz. He wants to be in Germany and prepare for the Euros, and he wants to play under Javi Alonso for at least one more season, maybe more. So
good for us. We can see him.
Yeah, I'm also not sure it's going to be Man City or any other Premier League teams that will ultimately win the race for him. But I guess that's a discussion for the next transfer window and the window after that.
Yeah, no, that's what honestly, that's why I tell English people, because English people, obviously, they never watch the Bundesliga, let's be honest. And they were all like, Marie, Florian Wirtz, I'm hearing stuff with Man City. Can you confirm? What type of player is he? La la la. Obviously, he was flying under the radar a bit last year because of the injury, but I see him more as a La Liga player, maybe, or maybe Bayern, but Bayern doesn't really need him, or maybe they do if Müller retires. I don't know, but like you said, that's all theoretical and probably a year away.
He does like playing with Jamal. But anyways, this is totally off topic. I'll do maybe a great transition to what we want to talk about next, and that's Bayern Munich. Transfer chaos, disaster, deadline day fiasco. I mean, there's so many adjectives we can use for what happened on Friday at Bayern at the Sebener Straße. Matt, I've born and raised in Munich. I followed and covered this club for a very long time. I cannot remember a deadline day like this at Bayern Munich ever. Certainly not one where they were unsuccessful. This whole Joao Palhinha story, he was already there. They already had him holding the shirt even, and the photographers were around, and it just all falls apart. We have a transfer show later this week, so we're going to discuss that in even more detail, but what a fiasco. And then, of course, the game against Gladbach where they narrowly win. But let's talk about this deadline day stuff first, because I've never seen this. Matt, your first takeaways from this?
Sorry, my mic was muted then, sorry. Certainly unusual. Not the sort of ending to a transfer window that you expect from Bayern Munich. Traditionally extremely well run. I think, as Uli Hoeneß has been saying since, the quote was, not normally we laugh about deadline day. They're normally, sat there with a Weissbier on the edge of the Tegernsee by that point, watching everybody else scrap around. But probably the logical consequence, isn't it, of the amount of sort of boardroom comings and goings that have been going on at Bayern over the past 6 months. Obviously, the new sporting director, Christoph Freund, has only been in the job for a matter of couple of weeks. Probably still some uncertainties at board level regarding the precise roles and levels of influence of Uli Hoeneß, Karl-Heinz Rummenigge, and how it all fits in. Obviously, even in Thomas Tuchel, you've got a coach who's only been in the job for barely 6 months. So, I think in many ways, maybe is a fiasco if you're looking for a big headline. I tend to actually think it's probably more of a logical consequence. Probably a one-off, and I think that once Bayern have got themselves sorted out, they'll be back to their usual modus operandi.
Mary, how did you make it, and what adjective are you going to use for your headlines?
Just wild. I honestly have to say, between us, I worked the early shift that day, and I'm so happy that I worked the early shift, not the late shift, because I got up early, cycled to work, to Ismaning, where most of the Munich-based sports sites are, and then worked from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. at Sport 1, doing the usual Transfermarkt, Ticker, etc. thing for keeping tabs on transfers. And at that time, it was all about Joao Felix and going to Barca and Cancelo, and there were some rumors about Thiago, etc. And then I left, and then I was at the gym, and I just get all these notifications, which I'm sure you guys got as well, from Kicker, Sport 1, Bild, international sites, and it's like, Ronda Kolomwani fell through. It's happening. It's not happening. And the same for, everything about Palhinha. Oh God, it was just wild. And then Borna Sosa randomly went to Ajax last minute, although he'd been linked with very much with a move to La Liga. And yeah, I mean, it delivered. Deadline day was, I'm sure all the sports sites had spectacular traffic. Manuela, maybe you can confirm that. But I think for Bayern, it was very unlucky. I do think it was kind of, I think the deadline day showed the power and influence that Thomas Tuchel has. The fact that Jan Christian Dresen and maybe also begrudgingly Rummenigge and Hoeneß were willing to, in the last week or last 2 weeks, negotiate for a player who we all know is probably their fourth or fifth choice holding midfielder, such a high transfer fee, just to fulfill this wish for holding six. But in the end, it didn't happen. And I think Benjamin Pavard, although, I rate him extremely highly. He's been so consistent for them. He's played under every single Bayern coach. It's like there's this German saying, Reisende kann man nicht aufhalten. If someone wants to leave, you can't stop them. And he's wanted to leave since January. I think hiring Pini Zahavi is as big an FU as you can, deliver at Allianz Arena after everything that happened with Lewandowski and Alaba. So his intentions were clear. If anything, something that I would very much kind of hold against them is letting Stanisic go, who's shown that he can play big teams, that he can defend well, who is a homegrown talent. People like that are also important sometimes for we all played team sports growing up. You need players like that in the changing room who are just reliable, keep their mouth shut, get the job done. And loaning him when it was clear that Pavard wanted to leave was just, to me, insane. So I think that's a shame. And I completely understand Tuchel kind of being very mad and kind of a bit whiny at the weekend. But with Palhinha, I think that was just, Fulham couldn't find a replacement. And honestly, unless they sign him in the winter, in which case, fine, then they still have their big games ahead. I think that could turn out to be a good decision, because I did think that was a lot of money for a 28-year-old Fulham player. And yeah, that's just my perspective.
I mean, his underlying stats are incredible. Wow, Palhinha. I was working the shift when all of this went down, and working the phones as well. But I think it's bad news for Bayern they didn't get this done. It's good news for the Bundesliga, because I think Palhinha will be the player that they're missing. When I wrote my big article on him, I compared him favorably to Javi Martinez, and we all know what Javi Martinez did for Bayern Munich, especially in his first year at the club. So, I think this gives the rest of the league a fighting chance, to be quite honest with you. And Mari, I'm going to go straight back to you, because a fighting chance is what we saw from Gladbach. Is this just how it is now, that when Bayern Munich play Gladbach, it's a game every time?
Yeah, I was actually kind of saying that to some friends who are Gladbach fans. I was like, excited for the game today, for the 3 points. And yeah, I just think Bayern struggles with teams that play football, that, have skillful players that want the ball. They've always struggled against Gladbach. They've always struggled against Leverkusen. And it's a compliment to Gladbach that even after all their changes, they were really competitive in this game. Yeah, but what you're saying about the Bundesliga, I think Palhinha is a player they would have needed in the Champions League, someone who holds his spot, who helps the defense. I don't think he necessarily changes things in the Bundesliga, because I think even just the fact that Tuchel fields Goretzka and Kimmich, who both like to attack, shows just like the lack of, tactical mastermindedness that's needed to beat these kind of Bundesliga teams, with the exception perhaps of Leverkusen and Dortmund and maybe Union, if they play away in Berlin. And of course, who am I missing? Leipzig. But I think one name I want to throw in is Alexander Pavlovic. I called a lot of people in the past week after Thomas Tuchel praised him after the Augsburg game, which a lot of people interpreted as kind of a threat. Like, if you don't sign Palhinha, I will play this young kid. But he's very reliable, and he's a good defensive player. He's a good leader. He's been with Bayern, with the academy since he was 11. He's from Munich. And why not? Like, this is now their only kind of defensive midfielder who's mainly defensive in their squad. And I think against some weaker Bundesliga teams, we might see him in the starting lineup in the coming weeks.
Mm-hmm. He's not the only one from the academy that stood out. Another one's Franz Kretzek. A remarkable story, who hasn't featured yet, but he has, it's really interesting because he had a growth spurt a couple of years ago, and almost ended his career because he didn't know what to do with his body, and took almost a year off of playing football. And when he was finally ready to come back, his amateur coach asked him if he could play wingback rather than midfielder. And of course, we all saw the goal that he scored against Liverpool in the preseason, right? Preseason is preseason, of course, but he's stuck with the squad. He said he hasn't played yet, but he's been in the squad every single match day, right? And including the Super Cup. So missing out on transfer targets means that a head coach like Tuchel will have to go to the academy, an academy that Bayern Munich spends 70 million euros a year on, by the way, to find players. And, maybe Plavolic is one, Kretzek could be another one. So it is really interesting. The one thing that I need to point out though, Mary, and I'm going to stick with you here though, is I actually think this was a very limited Gladbach side. The transfer window wasn't great. They lost a lot of tools. I actually, let me rephrase that. I think the transfer window was great, but I don't think they have really found all the tools yet that they need for long-term success. And of course, I'm thinking about the Leverkusen game and the way Leverkusen absolutely dismantled them. Yet Bayern Munich show up, and all of a sudden there's a very different team.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I wrote an article, like I think everyone did early in the summer, like what is happening at Gladbach? Why are they selling all their best players? I mean, obviously it wasn't really their choice in most cases, but I think an element that I don't think gets talked about enough is how good the coach is that they signed. And he just fits the club philosophy like a glove, with attacking football, possession-based football. We saw how much that improved Ngumu, for example. Plea is finally playing his position again, and I think he'll improve as the season continues. Now they signed Jordan from Union, and yeah, I'm not worried about them. I think everyone who was like, oh, Gladbach will be relegated, I don't see that happening. For that, the club is too well run. Structurally, it's very professional. I think obviously Bayern should have beaten them, but I think that's on Bayern, not on Gladbach. And Gladbach, for example, they have a great defense. Ko Itakura, I think, on a good day is one of the best defenders in the Bundesliga. Wöber was a great signing. And Elvedi is still there, I think. What happened to Elvedi? I know he was going to go for the longest time. And Marvin Friedrich is a reliable backup defender. So, yeah, I don't know why I'm zooming in on Gladbach like this. I think because you were saying that you don't rate them very highly. But I think they'll probably end up in a one-digit position in the table. I don't see them kind of competing against relegation by any means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they just didn't have the tools that, the tools that hurt Bayern in the past. I didn't think that they would have them this year, but I guess they still do. Matt, and with that in mind, before we go to the game that you've attended, and I really want to touch on that briefly because we have a big game to discuss on Sunday. That's the big Sunday game to discuss as well. The Bundesliga should really do more marketing this game as the true Klassiker, eh? Because it actually is a competition every time.
It is, and obviously historically, there's the if you go back to 70s and 80s, you can argue that Gladbach versus Bayern is the real Klassiker in German football, if you want. Yeah, exactly. And obviously, if you go back to recent seasons, Gladbach have got an extremely good record against Bayern. Nevertheless, First of all, when I saw the scores coming through, I was pleasantly surprised to see that they seemed to be repeating themselves this time by, taking the lead against Bayern and then holding on for so long. However, I must admit, having seen the game back, I tend to agree with you, Manu, a little bit more that this wasn't really comparable to previous Gladbach performances against Bayern, of which I've seen quite a few. Particularly, there was the one early on in the league. There was obviously the big cup defeat that Bayern had in Gladbach a couple of years ago, where Gladbach were really able to hurt Bayern with quite specific weapons, namely the likes of Player and Thuram on the break around those pivots of Stindl and Hoffmann in the middle. I don't think that was the case this time. I think, they've taken the lead through Itakura, who, totally agree with Marie, certainly one of the best defenders in the Bundesliga. Nevertheless, they were under the cosh for large periods. Thought, goalkeeper, standing goalkeeper, Moritz Nicolas was probably Gladbach's best player. Looking back at it in hindsight, I think it was inevitable that Bayern would win the game. However, the reason that it wasn't as comprehensive as you think as maybe you would have expected it to be, is definitely more down to Bayern's weaknesses rather than Borussia Mönchengladbach's strengths, this season. And again, sorry to bring it all the way back to Bayern, but I think that's probably the sort of consequence of this transfer window for them that we're going to probably have to get used to, at least for the rest of the first half of the season. As has been touched upon, Kimmich and Goretzka are going to have to be a little bit more conservative. I don't think chances for Bayern are going to be so easy to come by. And I think we might have to expect these sorts of quite unspectacular performances from Bayern in the Bundesliga. However, as we've also touched upon, and as we mentioned a couple of weeks ago, Bayern's approach to the Bundesliga is not Bayern's approach to the Champions League, and I think they still have money to spend in January, and if they are able to land a couple more targets that Tuchel wants in January ahead of the business end of the Champions League, that's when we'll maybe start to see a more creative and more dangerous Bayern Munich. Until then, I think these sorts of performances against Leipzig Gladbach are going to be something we can get used to.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, they've earned 70 million euros by selling Pavard and Gravenberg plus add-ons, which basically cover the money that Ajax is still going to get for Gravenberg, right? So there's 70 million euros burning a hole at Bayern Munich, and I think they're going to spend that in January, which makes me think that if this Bundesliga season needs to be interesting, it's from now till window opens on January 1st that clubs need to take points from them, because I think they're going to keep much better come the spring when they have, also now they have time, of course, to identify the players that they need. Is another important takeaway. But enough about Bayern. There's a transfer show coming later this week where we're going to probably talk just about that. So don't want to take away too much from it. Matt, really briefly before we talk about the final Sunday game, how was in Frankfurt? Kolo Muani gone, 95 million euros. It's a big fee. It's such a big fee that Frankfurt actually confirmed the transfer fee in their official club statement. But you were at the game, and I want to just say we keep this briefly because we have a Sunday game still to talk about, the Sunday evening game. But how was the experience?
Well, it was my first visit to the Waldstadion since the renovation of the Nordwestkurve behind the goal at Frankfurt. And if people have missed that, I think I hinted at it with the ticket price article that I did. For any stadium nerds listening, Frankfurt have expanded the terrace behind the goal from about 7,000 or 8,000 places to approaching 20,000 in total, bottom tier and upper tier. So it's an impressive sight when you enter the ground. Up to 20,000 standing fans across two tiers. I think, like we said last time, as if Eintracht Frankfurt need any more noise. Also noticeable, again, bringing it back to Muani, was a huge banner across the front of the terrace at the start of the game, referring to, and see if anyone's German's good enough to get the pun, but referring to Kolo Muani, and Kohle being German slang for cash, for money. The suggestion being from the, at least from the Ultras Frankfurt that's the main motivator behind Kolo Muani's move. Perhaps they're right. And in fairness, Markus Kruscher, the sporting director, has actually made no bones about that. He said that at the very, very last minute, Nasser Al-Khelaifi at PSG got involved personally with an offer up to 95 million euros, which he said would be economic madness to turn down. Ultimately that's the reality for Bundesliga clubs when that sort of money is laid on the table. Even Markus Kruscher seems well aware of that even though it meant that it was far too late in the day to organise a replacement, that is absolutely huge money for Eintracht Frankfurt. The Ultras might not like it, but unfortunately it's the business they find themselves in.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think turning down 95 million euros for a player, no matter what the structure is, because I'm pretty sure it's structured, would be madness for a club like Frankfurt, especially for a player that you signed for nothing a year ago. And you don't know if that player still is going to be worth that much money next year. I totally understand Frankfurt. I think they did everything right here. But, Mary, we want to talk about the club that you think is going to be Bayern Munich's title challenger. They've gone to Berlin, RB Leipzig. And I have to say, I did bet a Leipzig win in the prediction show. I did think it would be a lot tighter. It wasn't, which was probably due to Kevin Volland seeing a red card. But Union Berlin lose at home for the first time in 24 games. We've talked a lot about Leverkusen and whether they are for real. What do you think of Leipzig? Are they for real? And of course, they have lost to Leverkusen, right?
Yeah, I think one thing that has surprised me and maybe surprised all of us a little bit is how quickly this new team has found themselves. Because it's only 2 months ago that we were all kind of reading obituaries of Leipzig after Dominik Szoboszlai left. It was clear Guardiola was going to go. And it's just they did lose some pillars of last season. And Max Eberl, was heavily criticized early in the window. But somehow everyone he signed, maybe with the exception of Baumgartner, who I rate very highly, but who hasn't quite found his space into the starting lineup yet. Everyone has delivered, and Xavi Simons, who to me was kind of a YouTube highlights player or a PlayStation player more so than it's always a gamble when you bring in players from the Dutch league because it's quite fun for attacking players to play in the Dutch league, and it's not quite the same as the tactical level or the quality, the defensive quality also in the Bundesliga. But he's done so well, starting with the Super Cup, and yeah, it's so they're so good that even Timo Werner is now struggling to find a spot in their core team, and of course he's been dismissed by Hansi Flick for the upcoming games. I think Marco Rose is the coach they've needed for a long time. He's fully committed to the Rasenballsport identity, if you can call it that. I actually wrote a piece about Christoph Freund last week and his background in the academy. And in the process of that, found these old Imago image database photos of Marco Rose coaching Xavi, of him coaching Schlager and Szoboszlai and all these players that kind of came up through the Red Bull Academy system. And it really helps also with transitions of players leaving, players coming in, when so many players kind of grew up on that tactical philosophy. And I think also out of the big clubs, maybe with the exception of Leverkusen, this is the team that interests people the least on a media level. So you don't have everyday kind of media breathing down their necks, although Rose often feels like he's being attacked a lot. But, if he were at any other club, that would be a lot more intense. So I think the the conditions there for a title run are very favorable. And I think one player I want to mention in particular for single out for praise is Benjamin Henrichs, who's been exceptional this season and really, really contributed a lot also on an attacking level. And I think if he keeps this form, if he stays healthy, he might even be a starter for Germany at the Euros. So yeah, that's my 2 cents to Leipzig and their prospects in the Bundesliga.
Matt, before we wrap this up, anything you want to add?
Not much, really. I think Marie's summed it up really well. The Red Bull roller coaster goes on, we touched on it a couple of weeks ago, didn't we? About how obviously they went from the high of the Super Cup win to the low of the opening day defeat. I think they followed that up with two good wins. I would add one slight caveat from the game against Union that I you might disagree. I actually thought the red card was a little bit harsh.
I think that was spot on.
A direct red. For me, it was quite orange. I can see the reasons why. I know the studs are up. I know he's caught Shumachan's, it's above his ankle. I know he's had to be substituted. That's fair. However, I don't think there was any malicious intent to it. And I think on another day, I think a yellow card. Yeah, I think you could argue that a yellow card would be a little bit too lenient, but I think a straight red is a little bit too harsh. So, yeah, slightly difficult one, and I think it changed the game. Because I thought before that, as much as Union didn't create much themselves, neither did RB either, to be honest. Apart from a series of long range shots, I think the goals when they did come were extremely well taken. I think I mentioned Dani Olmo last time. I'm a huge fan of his, incredible player to watch. Obviously, he's combined really well with Chesko for the third, and obviously I think he's set up is it the first or second goal? I think it's his ball out of defence.
Which sets goals.
Yeah, but it's his ball out of defence which sets up the one counter attack. Then again, they all find themselves in so much space, which is a direct result of Union being down to 10 men. And like I said, in my opinion, the red was perhaps slightly harsh.
Yeah, I spoke to a referee and he said it was actually purple. That's how red it was. So I guess it really differs, but I'm not a referee. Chris Williams, we had him on, Matt. He could explain to you probably quite well why he thinks that this is a fully justified red card. But like Stefan, Chris is on holiday.
I'm just going to add, Manuel, I think it's also culturally, right? You know, like in the Premier League, this may very well not have been a red. There was a similar scene in the Arsenal game, which happened kind of around the same time, Sunday night. And yeah, I think, and I really appreciate about the Premier League that it's so much about fair play and good conduct. And you could see even during the foul that Volland was shocked that he hit him and pulled away and lifted his arms and apologized. And then Willi Orban kind of had to console him as he walked off the pitch. I think the contact was there and it was the open sole, it was the boot. So yeah, technically with the rules, it is a straight red, but I don't think he'll be banned for like 4 games, for example, because it wasn't an evil foul. It was
malicious.
Exactly.
Yeah. Not malicious intent. No, but the laws of the game do state that you have to be in full control of your body. You can be penalized for something that you didn't intend to do. So no intent, as you said, no malicious intent. But I spent a lot of time with Chris Williams in a referee chat, and he would say that it doesn't matter whether the player wants to do it or not. It's just the consequences of the actions that they have to penalize by the laws, as laid out by IFAB. Anyways, guys, unfortunately, we're out of time. I think we could have probably do this for another hour. Mary, ladies first. Where can people find you? What should people read? What have you been up to? The floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, if you're in the US, you can usually watch me on match days on ESPN Plus, where I do the field interviews for the Bundesliga coverage, and I mostly cover the southwestern region. So Augsburg, Freiburg, Hoffenheim, Stuttgart occasionally. Stuttgart's always very fun. I'm really positive. I was there for the Relegations game, and I was always really impressed by the atmosphere there. Frankfurt occasionally I do as well. And I'm quite active on Twitter, or X as we call it now. And you can find me at Marie Schubo, so Marie with IE at the end, and then SCHUBO. And if you read German, you can follow my work on Sport1, so sport1.de. You can also use a DeepL translator, which I love if you want to read them in English or whatever your native language is. And then I write for Forbes about sporting business topics, but that they're very lenient on that. So it can also just be a transfer story. And I cover a lot of Bayern Munich for Forbes. So yeah, that's me. And I love being on podcasts. So any of the regular kind of popular English language shows about the Bundesliga, I'm sometimes a guest there as well.
Yeah, like this great show.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on, Mary. And Matt, how about you?
Yeah, first of all, totally agree with Marie regarding Stuttgart. Absolutely love any chance I get to get down there. I was also there for the playoff against Hamburg, and it's that among a lot of good atmospheres that stood out. Always a good visit. As for what I've been doing, as I said earlier, I've been predicting Bayer Leverkusen title challenges, haven't I? So I'm not sure if that article's up yet. It might be up in the morning, but either way, it'll be on my Twitter. So it's Matt_40. So yeah, you can all tell me how premature I am with Leverkusen title challenges. But they've not got form for bottling it, have they?
No. Also, I may have written something similar just a week ago.
There you go. You see, all about the Leverkusen train.
Yeah, all about the Leverkusen train. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for coming on. As always, this show is brought to you by Bet Online. We'll be back later this week with more content. Until then, auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Thank you for listening to Believe. You can show support to your host by subscribing to the show and giving us a 5-star rating on your preferred platform. Check us out at Believe.com and search for BLEAV on YouTube.